Tonight, we gather with the team who developed Our Country, the multimedia version, which was commissioned for FirstWorks Urban Carnevale and premiered on December 30th. We're recording this conversation. We're pleased to have so many of you with us tonight, but there's an afterlife, and people joining a conversation or listening to it in their own time. Although we're meeting in the virtual world, I would like to acknowledge that FirstWorks is hosting this conversation on the occupied Indigenous lands that are the traditional homelands of the Narragansett and the Wampanoag peoples. Tonight carries forward our Raise Your Voice program, which for many years has celebrated the vision of artists of color and our diverse audiences and diverse community. As an arts producer and educator and art incubator at FirstWorks, we're committed to the role we need to play in the fight for racial equity. This is a time when the arts are essential, relevant, and we believe hold the potential for change. So over a decade, it has been a joy and mind expanding, soul expanding experience to collaborate with Daniel Bernard Roumain. He's widened our circle of relationships and friendships and ways of thinking, and tonight is a great example of that, about how the arts can impact our world. And although Daniel is, I feel like every day I find you a different place, but actually we think of you as a Rhode Island artist, even though you're working across the country and the world. So I'm excited that we have two filmed performances, short performances to share with you tonight, Our Country and About Face, and that we have Drew Dollaz with us and Sam Woolf with us. And have really come to see through these conversations that actually we believe the stories that each of you have to tell about your own narratives are going to be more powerful than listening to me talk about your incredible credits and backgrounds. So I'd love to ask you each to introduce yourself. And Daniel, this is your second year as our artistic ambassador. We're very honored by that. So maybe I could ask you to go first as kind of in a way, a host of this conversation as well.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you, Kathleen and Drew and Sam, always, and always Suzanne and Holly in the background there, but always in our foreground. I would usually do like my 10-second introduction. Which actually would be, my name is Daniel Bernard Roumain. I'm a Black Haitian American composer, and by composing, I'm farming and framing ideas. But to be a little more generous, the 1-minute introduction would be that I'm a composer, I'm a violinist, I'm an educator and learner, and father to a biracial son who's 11 years old. I'm ever mindful of our politics. Hours ago, a stimulus package was signed. That means many of my friends are going to get real dollars into their bank accounts this weekend. But it's also more than that. It's this notion of who is in charge, who holds the purse strings, who makes the decisions, and who can't. And I'll say this, that for as long as Kathleen Pletcher has been holding the purse strings and making decisions at FirstWorks, I think FirstWorks and the state of Rhode Island and the city of Providence is being well served. And you are truly an advocate to the BIPOC community and to BIPOC artists, and especially at this time when we need advocacy and support.
Thank you. Drew.
Hi, everybody. My name is Drew Dollaz, and I am a dancer, choreographer, artistic director, father as well. First generation American. My family is from Barbados, and they moved here with the idea of creating more opportunities for their family. And yeah, I kind of started off as a street dancer. I'm a pioneer of a dance style called flexing, which is a Brooklyn-based street dance style that gears around arm contortion, and we call it bone breaking. And I use that and I incorporate it with different elements of dance, almost creating this contemporary kind of form, which incorporates point from ballet and create this hybrid kind of dance form, which you'll see in the next two films. And I went from being a street dancer, transitioned into commercial and dance for artists like Rihanna, Madonna, Skrillex. And then I got to a point in my career where I felt like I was almost a pawn to somebody else's ideas, and I wanted to take control of what I did with my art. So I took a step away from the commercial world and focus more on theater, and where I'm able to, you know, and that's why I transitioned from just being a dancer into a choreographer, into artistic director, where I'm putting out work where it highlights my dance the way that I would love it to be highlighted. And now I've been able to work with these lovely men here, Sam and Daniel, and you know, the collaborations allow us to magnify our art as individuals and as a collective. So thank you for having us, and I hope you guys love what you see in a couple of minutes.
And Sam, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Sam Woolf. I am a cinematographer, and I've been working out of the New York area since 2013. I was raised in Arizona, and I think I'll keep it mostly to the 10-second intro. I work largely in nonfiction, so I shoot a lot of documentary films, and more recently I've been getting more involved with performance videos as well, especially since the onset of COVID.
Thank you. So I wanted to also mention to everyone who's listening that we will take some questions, and we're using the Q&A function in Zoom to do that. So please put any thoughts you have as you see this work and hear this conversation there. We have some unseen collaborators here too, working with us on Urban Carnevale, and this most recent edit of Our Country is Carlos Toro from Steer Media. And as Daniel said, the FirstWorks production team or program team behind the scenes, Suzanne Kim and Holly Taylor. So we had talked just before you all joined us that we thought the most powerful thing would be to see Our Country, and that's about 4 minutes long, and then come back for conversation. So let's watch Our Country.
You're muted again.
I rarely mute myself, and tonight I'm really tripping into it. So thank you all for coming together tonight, for coming together in December to create this work. And I'd love to, now that we have seen, you know, dance and music and film combined, talk about your process, your intent, and your role in this work.
I guess I'll start it off. Let's just talk about how it started. The Our Country piece, we was talking about it before we went we went live with everybody, but it's literally a composition that Daniel made 11 years ago. So it's something that, without knowing, like, grew over the course of 10 years, where now it has a visual piece to go with it that it could live digitally. And me coming into it, I felt like it's my goal every time as a mover, as a, you know, movement artist, to give it a visual. Not only do you hear it, but you should also see it, right? So my goal was to make one of the most thought-provoking pieces that speaks to what our country is, right? And the future of our country, where it stands. And after a conversation with Daniel, we decided that like, every time we speak, he has like these interesting words that allow me to like really tap into my artistry. And he's like, you know, names hold weight. Like, people names are important. You should always remember people's names. And that's why, you know, when I walk out in the beginning of the piece, I'm holding up papers with names on it, and every name that was on the paper had its own meaning to somebody, right? And but, you know, what all three of them had in common was that they were all victims to police brutality, and they were all, you know, colored women. And even the names at the end of the piece is like, what, they still all colored women, but they're women in places and positions that rewrite that narrative of, you know, women of color being victims. We shouldn't think of ourselves as victims, but as individuals who play a part in the forwarding of our race and our culture. So even down to the ladies who lost their life through the police brutality, those actions had to happen for those women to make, like, have a impact today. It has to, like, you can't have one without the other. So the piece of Our Country, like, I felt like through the process of making it, this goes to a lot of the pieces where it comes to collaboration. It's never really like, we never really have permission to do so. So for example, me and Sam, we went to a national park that was out here in Brooklyn, and the first thing they did to us before we even started recording, they stopped us and said, "You guys need a permit to do this." And it's like, you need permission to make art. And that's the interesting thing. It's like, we never really have permission to do these things. We do it because we want to do it. And even if we had a roadblock of people telling us that we shouldn't do it, we still go on and do it because, like, now look, you have this really, you know, provoking piece that we are able to have this conversation with. And I think that's pretty much my role as an artist, is to create pieces for people to have conversations around, even if it's really, really hard to watch and really, really hard to get around because it's so real. But I think because it's not like, of course, it's like this hyper fantasy that we are creating. It's not the actual real life, but it's elements that we created in our minds that we can talk about. Because something, like, to be honest, a lot of people don't really want to talk about the true actual facts that's happening around us on a day-to-day.
Totally agree. I'm so glad you. I was wondering where this was shot. You know, it could have been Mars. You know, it's the lone dancer on the tundra. Particular light seems like, you know, the light before the lights go down. Sam, I'm wondering if you could, why that place? What I'm just interested initially. First of all, what a way to start. Wow, even for me, I'm like, ooh, this is hard. And I get the right choice. Start with the work. The lone violin, the lone dancer, the lone filmmaker, on the tundra. Could have been anywhere. So very fascinating choices. Sam, I wonder if you could help me understand the mechanics of it. How do you, assuming it's one camera, how do you work with a dancer? It almost seems like a pas de deux between a choreographer and a cinematographer. Help me understand that.
Yeah, it was a project where we met each other and then created all of the material for it, and then went our separate ways within a time period of, I think, about 3 hours. And that was largely motivated because it was very cold out. I think it was the 23rd of December. And obviously Drew is in a button down, and so we didn't want to kill him. And I think that I'm happy that you mentioned the sort of the pas de deux aspect of it. I think I really like that interpretation of it. My experience with it was that Drew came with a really clear vision. I think that from the perspective of the message, he understood exactly what he wanted to say and how to say it. And then what really struck me right off the bat was how cleanly that translated into movements in a body. I'm not a dancer myself, and so I'm kind of approaching it from a different framework. And sometimes I think that I can tell that a dance is beautiful, but it's but you know that something is lost on you. You know that they're doing something that is really just kind of like on a higher level. And I think what was special about Drew's performance and what made it so exciting to film is that it was very clear right off the bat. Like you could tell that there was this visceral element to how he moves, and I had never seen somebody bone breaking before, and so there was this kind of this feeling of like like the motions that the body goes through. You can tell that at some point Drew had to go through pain to get his arms behind his head in that way, or to be able to balance on his toes like that. But from that comes this kind of like elegance and beauty. And so for me, it was kind of handed to me that he had this way of moving that translated so neatly to the message that he was trying to tell, which was one of these these groups of people who have been through such an immense amount of pain, but then out of that, there's this hopeful note going into the future that maybe we can build something stronger. And so so for me, honestly, the job was very easy. I was just kind of running up towards him when he was doing something that drew me in, and then when he would do something that kind of expanded the space, then I would try to run back and see the space expanding, and that was kind of the extent of my involvement at that point. Other than that, it was just Drew being a really beautiful human and dancer, and I just had the pleasure of watching him go.
Yeah, if I could jump in real quick, it was actually a location that I scouted. The actual, if you get to see the place in person, it's literally, like you said, it's the tundra, but it's like a lot of different paths. And I thought just using the environment in itself to play along with the story was important. So I was like, let me use these paths as the path that we took to get here and the path that we will take to go into the future. So that's why that particular location worked out. And then it had like, it was very bare because of course it's winter. So the way that the sun beamed into that location, it was very, very, very hot. Like it's, there was no shade. It was just right there, dead on. And then I think we were working not only with the time that the park was closing, but also with light. So we got there where the sun was the highest that it could possibly be, and then we shot all the way until we couldn't shoot anymore.
And you also started wiping red paint all over your shirt at some point, which really set a limit on what we could do.
Right. Once I started wiping the red paint on me, it was like, oh, well, we can't get that much more shots now. And then the paint, like as soon as I dipped my hand in the paint, it was so cold outside that I felt it freezing on my hands. Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
It's really interesting and not something, it's something I feel watching the work because it's so powerful, but to think about pain. And I think even a deadly pandemic did not stop the world from protesting George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. And I wonder as artists whether you think of your work as protest. If that's I guess the other part to that for me is, or if you think of the change agent that a work of art becomes, and I'd say I've been listening to the musical piece Our Country for a long time because I'm just moved by it, and there's almost an ineffable way that by putting movement and visual and language and names, it has become yet another dimension. But I guess just to come back to the idea of art and activism, and whether you are creating from feeling and image, or whether you're consciously thinking about protest and change.
That's a really great question. I think for me, succinctly, right now, yes, so much of my work is protest, proudly so, and it's also it's protest. It's poetic, I think, and it's also it's a kind of activism. It's response, rapid response in some cases. It's a lot of things, but to answer your question, right now my work is protest, and I think what's also interesting, because of the nature of my work, I wrote a piece called Rosa Parks. All of my string quartets are for iconic figures from the civil rights era. Rosa Parks was written, I don't know, 15 years ago. Voodoo Violin Concerto, gosh, I don't know, 20 years ago maybe? I'm old. But, works like that, which weren't necessarily about protest, I mean, the string quartets were really about portraiture, have become about protest, have been able to, almost like an actor, step into the role of protest. I have works like this one that are as old as my son that have a new relevancy. And I think that's fine. I think that's great. I'm privileged. I am privileged in that. But I think a lot of BIPOC artists, and I have a feeling, well, I know, that there are many artists who we did work decades ago that is only now finding an audience in this time. It tells you something, right? I'll have to look at the date, but Rosa Parks, I believe, is about 30 years old. And 30 years ago, it was commissioned by the Orchestra of St. Luke's, played by a few quartets, maybe one or two, and that's it. And now suddenly, but that's the thing, now suddenly, these works, the work of BIPOC artists is speaking to something, and I think it's an important thing to mention that I also, as I'm thinking about your question, Kathleen, I look forward to, and maybe I need to do this tomorrow, I look forward to writing a piece about the lights or clouds, or, I'm eating jelly beans right now. In other words, I'm getting to this notion of, one of the traps of the Black artist is being invited in to talk about protest and Blackness and this moment, and being told, by invitation, speak to this moment. Well, the best invitation is really, I think, a moment of trust. And you have exhibited this, Kathleen, where you say, I trust you to express artist anything you want to. And I know as a Black artist, I am looking forward to, so much of my work is about the Black experience, by the way, but I'm looking forward to talking about the Black experience of love, of, you know, the love of father. I think Moonlight in that sense is important, right? A film like that is so important. I think that, you know, I think that inclusion means that you're in the room, but can we get away from inclusion and talk about centering as a radical act for the producer and the presenter and the artist to all engage in. Boundless presentation, boundless invitation, there we go. Boundless invitation. I'm looking forward to that. I'm almost contradicting myself, but I'm saying that because your question is weighing on me so much. I think that it is, in some ways, for me, I feel a particular role and responsibility in speaking to this moment, right? What is the new racism, for example? Is it to say no instead of now? But for me, I do think that I'm looking forward to how can I also inspire by thinking about the cold, by thinking about the weather, by really going back to this notion of, you know, right now on Mars, there's this man-made object doing something. And of course, where my mind immediately goes is how many Black people were involved with that rover, with Perseverance? That's a really good question, right? How many Black people, how many BIPOC people, and I'm going to end right here, Kathleen. Why not? Why can't the first person on Mars be a BIPOC person, a BIPOC woman? Wouldn't that be something, right? Now, is that protest or is that poetic? Yeah.
I think it actually, I had two different words that went in different directions. So I think what we think about in kind of perhaps complement, we hope synergy, partnership is change. And how does live performance bring about change? And as a white woman leading an arts organization, I feel, you know, that is our responsibility, that it isn't Black artists need to do the protesting, lead the protest, make the change happen. I feel that we are there too. So is this about who's in the room? Is this about what Drew said about the conversation that the work then brings up? Is it about, you know, I'm seeing in the chat, the pain, the way this is a searing piece. Is this about images that penetrate beyond thinking of, you know, not politics, but, you know, our time? So I feel like all those are questions that there is an opportunity that, sorry, you're supposed to be talking, but, you know, this is what happens when Daniel and I get together. I get all fired up and then we keep going, I think, but I think that it is about how we can find a path forward. And Sam, Drew, please.
I think Daniel said something really interesting, and it got me to thinking like how pieces that we create, once it's created and put out into the public, it now has a life of its own, and it has the ability to morph itself without us even trying. And it goes back to what you were saying about, like, is your intentions a specific intention? And it's like, I think our initial intention is to be the voice, get the work out. But what that work does after we put it out, it's no longer what we choose, you know, but we made it so I guess in the back of our heads, we know exactly what it can become. We know the potential of our own work. So as it's continued to develop and become an entity of its own, we are able to like kind of navigate where it becomes. So if it becomes a voice for the people, then, you know, we're right next to it. You know, there's no way that it's not one of our intentions when, you know, it's created in our vision.
Yeah, I think the position of art in relation to activism is something that like I grew up in a pretty quiet part of the Southwest, and I think that politically there was a good amount of debate about the border, but outside of that, it was a really quiet area. And so coming to New York and then entering into the art scene has been this constantly incredible experience of learning the possibilities and sort of the potential of art, and how it can shape the public sphere and policy. And I think that something that particularly working with Daniel and Drew has helped me realize is that um, I'm kind of comfortably seated as a um, as the role of a translator. Somebody comes to me with an idea, and then through one part technicality and then one part creativity, I help them to sort of uh, bring that to a format. And I think that in that sense, I think that they speak volumes, and I couldn't ever put it better than they said. The role of art and kind of creating conversation and instilling ideas in people. Something that I've realized maybe from a partially outsider perspective in this sort of in between space is that I think that I've realized that working on art that inherently has an element of protest to it tends to be one of the most exciting experiences. And I think that a large part of that is because art tends to follow the arc of history in a really natural way, in the same way that protest does. I think you kind of know in your heart when something feels right. And so I think that when you end up working with people where you're creating a piece of art, but also spreading a message, and you can kind of tell in your heart of hearts that that's something that really applies, and you can feel it, and you know that there's integrity to it, then I think that those projects help me at least to answer the question of art's relationship with protests and activism, and that um, is that they kind of inform each other. I think it would be impossible to separate the two, and I'm not necessarily the source material, but I can say after working for, you know, a handful of years that um, that you can tell when things just line up like that. And so I guess that's the greatest validity that I've had to it. And then of course through the pandemic, it's just been so evident constantly that we all turn to art when we're left to our own devices, and it's and obviously I think it's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you all. I want to make sure not to at all stop the flow of the conversation but to add to it with about face. And Daniel, if you could frame us seeing this next work, that would be great.
Sure, and it features the brilliant dancing and choreography of Drew Dollaz again. About Face is a parallel work to an evening length work called The Just and the Blind, which is a trio work between myself on stage, between conceived and written by the great Mark Bamuti Joseph, with music by me, and choreography and movement by Drew Dollaz. And the Just and the Blind is a series of monologues on fatherhood and racism and oppression and law enforcement, or the interactions, the unfortunate pas de deux between law enforcement and people of color. Excuse me. The film itself was shot in Oakland, California, by the great Yoram Savion, who Drew has worked with for many, many years in terms of Yak Films, which is a very important, well, he's a very important filmmaker, and that's a very important company and website and YouTube channel that features street dancing and hip hop dancing over many, many years. It's almost a documentary or a documentation of this type of dancing. Millions of views, by the way. I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing. Our audiences should check it out. We'll put the link in the chat room, Yak Films. But About Face also tells the story. What happens to a young man? What happens to a young man a young boy of color growing up into the promise of becoming a young man of color? What are the obstacles? Who are advocates? Who are adversary? And what is the role and responsibility of a father to his family, of a black man who's a father to his family? And in that sense, I think, Drew, you are an actor embodying several roles in the film without giving too much away. But as a Haitian person, I think one of the roles that you occupy for me in the film is one of the spirit, the apparition. What? A few minutes. How do you? How would you talk about this film?
This film is, man, you get an emotional roller coaster every time, because I realize that with every, without telling too much, with every boy of color that you see in the film that you're about to watch, I live within all of them, which means all of them live inside each other. It's like we all live the same story. We may be given different obstacles in our lives, but we experience the same or similar, challenges in life. And, the thing that normally is reoccurring is the fact that, it's not an even playing field for us, and understanding that and knowing that. And I think one of the interesting things that you would notice even from the really early into the film is that that's the question of when does this idea of the black man being a criminal begins to be injected into kids? Like, when is, like, oh yeah, you're doing something bad? Like, when are we chastised for the things that we do wrong? In most cases, if you're a kid with a lot of energy, you're just a kid with a lot of energy. But in other cases, it's like, no, you're a kid with a lot of energy, so there's something wrong with you.
Yeah. So,
yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah. So let's watch the film. I'm just mindful, Kathleen, of a 9-year-old girl crying out for her father, a 9-year-old black girl calling out for her father who is handcuffed and pepper sprayed, right? In Rochester, New York. So this film is speaking to this notion of when does the black child's face, that beautiful face that we all would kiss and love, become sinister, become the face of a quote unquote criminal. I think that's what Mark's words are getting to, and the words propel the visual. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's watch.
That piece really weighs heavy every time.
Every time.
And I could think about it, like, we shot that in 2 days. 2 days. And like, even watched it now, I'm looking at all of the metaphors and the little Easter eggs that we put into the piece. Like, for example, the train station part, like, that's Fruitville Station. That's the same station that a man who was apprehended by the police, and he was in handcuffs already, about to get taken, and they shot and killed him there. Oscar Grant is his name. we was like, we have to do the same train station when we do the train station part, just so that if we're doing it in Oakland, we're talking about uh, interaction between, you know, a cop and a person of color, that we use this particular train station. And even with the the school in which we picked, it just happened to be a Afrocentric school, and they just happened to have like pictures of the Black Panther Party, you know, Malcolm X. They even had like old shackles and chains, and with old no colored people allowed signs. I was like, where did you get this stuff? And everything just happened to be where we needed it to help propel the story when we was picking locations. And I felt like, you know, it was a sign that that piece needed to be made in that time frame when we was actually doing it, because it was like the almost divine intervention where everything was aligned for us. The only thing we had to do was do it. And of course, once again, like there was no permission. We didn't have, you know, permits for anything. We was just like, all right, we're gonna go and shoot this piece because this what we're trying to say needs to be heard. And yeah, me and Yoram, we worked, you know, many times before, so we already had like a synergy between us, where it made it very easy. If we had a spirit of the moment that we needed to get a shot, we just went and got the shot right then and there, and then moved off the scene. For example, the scene in the grocery store, where I had, of course, it was a fake gun, guys. It wasn't a real gun. Went into the grocery store and, you know, did the little stick up the store scene. Like in that neighborhood of Oakland, that stuff is not allowed, even by the locals. So it's like if anybody who's really cool with that grocery store would have seen that scene or was in the store when that happened, it probably wouldn't have happened, because it's like they protect their neighborhoods. So to think of the extreme that we go through as artists to get these works out there, it's pretty interesting. I feel like for me, it's like I put my life on the line for my art, right? And then as serious as I see that is, you know, I guess it translates as well through the material itself.
You know, it's hard to speak. in,
Yeah.
in a certain way, I feel like there is a breathing space that both these works need. And we're having a conversation. I wanted to bring forward a question, which kind of after taking that breath, about how your art reaches, or how you think about your art reaching the people who might really have a different point of view and not be respectful. And you know, is that a confrontation, or what do you hope?
Well, hopefully it's a teachable moment for all of us. That would be the best hope. My older sister talked about Trump in terms of a marriage, right? She didn't just vote for him, she loves him. When he says or does things that are wrong, and many times she doesn't agree with him, she says, see, you don't understand love. You don't understand devotion. You don't understand being so loyal to someone that you accept all of their flaws. Now, to me, that sounds cultish almost. And it sounds like, you know, something that's not quite love, but it does help you to understand a certain psyche and a certain American trope, a tradition actually, of multiple standards depending on your race, your gender, your socioeconomic standards, so on and so forth. I mean, we just witnessed this with Meghan Markle and her fascinating interview with Oprah Winfrey, right? That you know, some of the most wealthy, powerful people, Oprah Winfrey herself, by the way, that racism, that to be excluded, to have a different opinion, this is unfolding right now, and it probably will never stop unfolding. And I think it's important for us, as I say it, Politicians, when politicians and pundits fail us, disappoint us, hurt us, artists, BIPOC artists, have always led the way. And by that I mean, will there ever be a shared morality? I don't know. Will there always be conflict? Probably. Will there always be work that responds to or suggests something deeper or different or better even? Absolutely, 100%. So to answer your question directly, I think that, you know, the minor aspect of this is just as that young boy, the young boy being in the classroom who has a different way of expressing himself, maybe, right? Who has a different way of talking, a different way of being. That's a really complicated conversation. A major aspect of this is what happened on January 6th, what is happening in our politics. This notion of who will suffer, who will survive or not. And what is the role of the artist? Well, maybe, Kathleen, as I think about it, we do need that cabinet secretary position of the arts, right? That's what we need. We need to make BLM energy and convert it into DEI policy, right? That's what I would say. The best conversations, the most complex debate, I hope, ends with the notion of the artist being at the table, helping to make those decisions of where our precious tax dollars go, and how we start to think about arts not in the periphery of our lives, but at the center of them, on Mars, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Just to bring forward another question, which, you know, we're all coming at this in different ways, and I keep feeling like there are these moments that just need to breathe, and these statements, which is, you know, talking about profound, what you just talked about, and needed change in terms of the whole arts infrastructure in our country. Bring us back to these two pieces, the question, Drew, of how you prepared for these pieces, and what changed between your preparation and I'd call it the performance, but the filming.
I think the where I get into the mindset of the actual performance is when I actually get into the same room with my collaborators and we all get on the same terms. Because I would think of a project one way just by reading it on paper, but after speaking to somebody that I'm collaborating with, it morphs into exactly what we all envision it to be. So for me, I go in there with the same mind that I have after speaking to my collaborators. Once we are all on the same page, and we know what we are trying to say, because normally I always know when the time comes to shoot that I know exactly the message that we're trying to get out and how to deliver it. So for me, it's more so tapping into the feeling, because I feel like feeling, the idea of feeling is a universal language. It's like the way that everybody feel, like there's I can't always have the words to express the way that I feel, but I can dance it, right? And you can translate the emotion in which I put out there through my dance by, you know, how aggressive I'm moving or the facial expressions or anything of that nature. So for me, it's more so the story, having the story and the emotions attached to what I'm doing before I go in and actually shoot anything. If I don't feel it the way that I feel like it would carry out the story, then I probably won't do it.
Thank you. I know we need to wrap up, and I think we started with reactions to the pain and the power in our country, and about faith You know, I'd love to be talking about future work, and there are projects that we're working on with FirstWorks and with you. But to make it a little more personal than that, to ask, where do you find, either in your art, your life, our world, a place for hope, joy, renewal?
What do you think, Sam? I don't want to go first. That's why I said it. What do you think, Sam?
Eat my time to hear you guys talk more. Jeez. I think I think hope is everywhere constantly, and I think that it certainly gets buried by a lot of other factors, but um, uh, perpetually, I think that, you know, it's certainly out there, and it's easy to forget that it is. I mean, I would even, I don't know. I guess I find hope in a lot of the same places where there ends up being a lot of pain, because the two, in contrast with each other, can kind of draw clear lines and bring a lot of clarity to it. Maybe that's part of why Drew's performance and Daniel's music resonated so much with me. I think that's the closest thing I could give to an answer, but honestly, I just want to hear what they have to say.
There's something that was, I think, like really close to exact answers. Like we have to dig into the pain to find the hope. You know, we have to know what makes us feel hopeless to know what we're hoping for. You know, so let's just say with the Our Country piece, it's like we start off with what hurts the most to get to where we know we're like the type of world that we're hoping for. And even with my role in that piece, is like it's generally a piece about women of color, but I'm a guy, a man of color, just speaking for them on both avenues. You know, it's like I think we've seen what America looks like when it's ran by, you know, the white man over a course of how many years, how many decades, you know, how many, and then, you know, we've seen what it looks like when it's ran by a man of color. But now it's like, what does it look like if we get into even having a woman in general? You know, we have a woman vice president now, which is a huge step forward, right? It's like to not make stuff so exclusive and have this idea that this type of role is only meant for this type of person. And you know, that in itself gives hope. It's like this hope that, you know, it's America is not cookie cuttered, and this is what you should expect when you live here. You know, so I think yeah, especially when I'm creating art, it's like it mostly I go into the pain to figure out what I'm trying to say, and you know, the hope is always the end result. It's like I'm not just talking about the pain just so that we can live in the pain. It's like we talk about these things with the hope that we can fix it. So if I had to add anything to what Sam said, it would be that.
So beautiful. I would say quickly and succinctly, I find hope in memory. I find hope in the shared communal experience of witnessing the artist express themselves boundlessly without fear or pause or hesitation. You know, even thinking about that. So I think it's two things for me. I find hope in the past, thinking about when I was most free, when I felt most free. You know, it's memory. It is memory, snapshots, the smell of something. You know, my father's big hands just holding me, and I'm 5 years old, and how I long for it. That brings me joy, actually. And I find hope in the promise of our future, in the promise of what the artist and artistic experience is, that great gift of the artist to speak to our past, to speak to our present, but to push us forward. Oftentimes with their bodies and their words and their imagination. I find hope in the imagination. Maybe imagination is the certainty, is the evidence of the soul. Maybe. And that's where I find hope. So thank you, Kathleen. I think that the work that FirstWorks does is to change and save lives. And maybe that's the third thing, that hope at its most valiant and vital function saves lives. And that's not hyperbole, y'all. In this conversation, how many people took their last breath? What is the role and responsibility of the living? Hope. I'll leave it there.
You have created a sacred space here. I thank you all for the brilliance of your art, for the perseverance of your spirit, for the gift of meaning and the search for meaning. Thanks everyone for being with us. And good night.